Holy mystery in my lifetime. Just drives you crazy.
It was May 23rd, 1948. The tug Robert Gray was heading upriver from Portland.
Two of our young employees, captain and deckhand, was bringing the boat back to the Dalles, Oregon.
The sun was out. The tug passed through Bonneville. The Columbia was 17 feet above flood stage.
Called in on the radio about 30 minutes from the Dalles.
A routine call, all normal.
That's the last we heard of them.
The Robert Gray sank and was never found. The boat belonged to Captain Slim Lapalato. It was one of many boats he and his competitor, Lou Russell, lost to the rapids of the Columbia, one of the toughest rivers in the world to navigate. These men pioneered commercial transportation on the Upper Columbia and opened one of the nation's most isolated regions to the markets of the world.
How would you like to have $10 million? You know, that's what you're responsible for. And you got guys down there that are sleeping in their bunk. You're responsible for their lives as well as your own, you know. A lot of responsibility. These guys were doing it when it was rough. We're doing it when it's pretty darn nice. You got the best equipment.
It's a drive to accomplish something that you feel you can do, and everybody else, 100%, are exactly confident that you can't do it.
It took people like us. The pantywaist wouldn't make it in that business.
In the early 30s, the Columbia Basin had the potential to supply fully 1/3 of all the grain exported from the United States, if a way could be found to bring the grain to market. Jim Hill managed the Pendleton Grain Growers Cooperative.
The farmers had had so much trouble over the years fighting the railroads about rates and so forth that just anything that even offered a possible solution to that, they were all for it. It was like manna from heaven.
For an area the size of Texas, there were no ports, few roads, and no reliable rail service. The river route began on the Snake River at Lewiston, Idaho, and met the Columbia River near Pasco, Washington. To reach the calmer water below the Dalles, Oregon, a captain had to push a tug and barge almost as long as a football field through nearly 100 rapids. But at the end of the run was pure profit, the potential to make millions.
There's only one thing I've ever been able to do in my life that I could say I've done good, or two things. I could always run a boat very good, and I could always fly an airplane good. Those were just like natural things for me.
After many wrecks and lost loads, stern wheelers had stopped running the Upper Columbia. It was too dangerous. Slim Lapalato believed that high-powered tugs designed for fast water could do the job, despite what everyone was telling him.
Competitors and the railroads and everybody says, hell, leave them alone, the elements will get them.
I think he's the type of person that if someone tells him he can't do it, then he'll spend the rest of his life trying to do it. And I think that's a lot of my father.
In the mid-30s, the farmers took a chance on Lapalato, but when the barge got stuck in the rocks of Salado Falls, he lost the load and with it his entire investment.
I had committed myself for several millions of dollars in equipment. And all of a sudden, your earning power is cut off entirely. You've got 5 cents in your pocket, and you start wondering, well, where do I go from here?
He asked his creditors to stick with him.
The thing that brought us out of it, that I was able to go to all the people that I owed money to and say, if you'll just give me a little time, I'll work out of this. I don't think I could do that today.
I started off, my first boat cost me $65. My first barge cost me $250.
During construction of the Bonneville Dam, Lou Russell tested the water with his own diesel tugs. His boat and barge designs are unique, even by today's standards, and helped make commercial navigation of the Upper Columbia possible.
You don't realize until you stop and look back and realize that you are part of history, you are part of development.
Its locks will enable shipping to use this great waterway much further inland than at present, and give an outlet to the enormously valuable agricultural and mineral products of Washington and Oregon and Idaho.
President Roosevelt came to Oregon in 1937 to dedicate Bonneville, the first major dam on the Columbia River. But despite the dam, long stretches of the Upper Columbia remained wild. Sam McKinney is the coordinator of the Columbia River Heritage Program at the Oregon Historical Society. At 15, he was a deckhand on the Georgie Burton, the last sternwheeler to run the Columbia.
Current downhill, rocks in the bottom of the river, wind blowing up, ice and snow. You have the dimension of the Upper Columbia River. Now your job is to get a tugboat through this thing all seasons of the year, night and day, keep on going, deliver the goods. It's a tough job.
There were no charts, no range markers, no radar, just 6 men and a tugboat.
There were so many places that it was really tight. I mean, you had to be right on top of it. And, you know, if you weren't, you were in big trouble.
Each set of rapids had its own challenges. Captains had to know them like a driver knows the twists and turns of a steep mountain road. Only a few of the men who steered boats through these waters are alive today. Captains Walt Smith and Darrell McBride remember the river as it used to be.
Yeah, you bet it was a thrill. He was doing something at that time was maybe out of the 2 companies that were working up here at that time, you're probably only talking about 20 people at the most that could do this, you know, and you were one of them.
Maybe it was the same kind of feeling when a really good diver makes a good dive and then he gets out of the pool and he looks over there and it's 9, 9, 9, 10.
For a tug and barge, the John Day Rapids was one of the trickiest. The John Day River entered the Columbia here, pushing the current at 35 miles an hour. Rocks threatened on both sides. What took an hour and a half going up would take 3 to 4 minutes going down.
I think probably Umatilla Rapids was the worst for the reason that it was so long.
At Umatilla Rapids, fast current. Water so shallow you could stand up in it. And below, rocks tough to spot. On board, a captain cranking the power to maximum and more.
There were some people that would sweat, some people that would shake a little bit, some people that would drink more coffee, some people that would drink or smoke a lot more cigarettes.
If it wasn't said in so many words it was understood, that when you went into one of them rapids up there in those days, you either got over or you blew an engine up.
There was only one way to do it, and that was the right way. Any other way was disaster.
Celilo Falls. For Native Americans, Celilo was a trading center, the best place on the river to catch salmon. Trolley cars would ferry men out to the prime fishing spots above the falls. Towboat men used a canal to go around the 80-foot drop. In April 1948, Burl Red and Mickey Martin were on board one of Russell's barges several miles upriver.
They had a barge tied up at the mouth of Deschutes, and these guys were on it when it broke loose, and it came down around the corner here by Celilo Park where it exists today. It went out and was going to go over the falls.
Yeah, one of them grabbed onto one of the fishermen's trolley lines and tried to walk across with his hands on that, and the other one jumped in and tried to swim to shore.
And they both drowned. If they'd have stayed on the barge, they would have had no problem at all.
His shoes were still on the barge when I picked it up here at Big Eddie Locks up here.
This was the only place in the world where barges were operated in rapids like we had. And it was so bad that we never hired anybody that had ever been on a boat before, because if we did, the first time that boat got close enough to the beach, they'd jump off.
Too young to be scared.
Mark Nichols was 17 when he started as a deckhand.
And that might be why they use kids. Other than the fact they didn't have to pay us any money. But I think that's probably because young people are fearless.
It took 7 years for a deckhand to make captain, a tough apprenticeship. If a 3-ton engine failed mid-trip, the crew would have to pull ashore and fix it. If a tug hit rocks, whoever was piloting forfeited his own mattress to plug the hole. The crew would be gone from home for weeks at a time. Joe Sabuco left home at 17 to work on the boats.
I've neglected being at school function with my kids. I've neglected being at a lot of things that I should have been. We had trips planned. The rest will come, say, would you work 5 days over? Sure.
When you spend 8 to 10 hours a day earning a living and you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're a damn fool. I've loved my work. It's a Umatilla. I worked on that boat. That's the Umatilla, which was...
At the visitor center at Bonneville Dam, Lou Russell explains to his wife, Sandra, how he started on the river, working summers on his father's steamboats.
So how old were you when you worked on that boat?
Well, I was 13, but that boat back in...
He's somebody that knows what he wants, knows how to get it, and doesn't stop until he has it.
And I found that I've been able to handle boats as well as anybody I've known. I've had a natural ability to do that.
At 36, he was running the company, determined to make it the best.
I'd made my mind up early in the game after battling with leaky tugs and leaky barges that I was going to have the finest equipment with the finest men running them.
Now, he's your boss. What did you call him?
Oh, Lou. He was one of the guys.
The deckhand didn't call him Slim. I don't even know if the captains did. It was Cap Lopalato to me, and maybe like if the president drove up, I wouldn't say, hi, George.
Third River Barge Line, book 26.
Slim Lopalato has chronicled his life in 54 scrapbooks of newspaper clippings and another 70 of photographs.
My mother came over from Finland as a 17-year-old girl, all by herself. My dad was killed in a coal mine accident approximately a month or so before I was born.
He grew up poor. Almost nothing could keep him away from the water, not even the severe burns he got when a tugboat exploded.
Went to hospital, and they took all my clothes away from me, and I forget who came to hospital, and I says, give me some damn clothes so I can get the hell out of here.
Starting his business on the river during the Depression, Lopalato had no choice but to succeed.
In my day, you didn't have anybody to turn to. You couldn't make it on your own. That was the end of you.
He was an excellent competitor. I had to outdo him. He made me better, and I made him better.
Soon after Lou Russell and Slim Lopalato started to work on the upper river, there were 43 tugboat companies competing for business. By the early 50s, there were 2. Russell and Lopalato were fighting each other as much as they were the river.
Lou loved to take a dig at me, and I guess I loved to take a dig at him. That was part of our game, like a couple old boys.
Well, you practically never get Slim and the Russells together in one room, but because they would just fight like they were just like Hatfields and McCoys.
Well, I guess I never trusted Lou Jr.
I never was able to trust him.
Routine competition turned to hardball when a group of farmers formed a company called Columbia Barge Lines to compete with Lopalato and the Russells. Lopalato says he and Russell's father made a gentleman's agreement that neither one would attempt to buy the farmer's tug, called the Rampant.
He runs right around the corner, picks up the telephone, and makes a deal with Columbia Barge Lines to charter their tug and barge. So I thought, well, I better keep an eye on this guy, I guess. So I had one of my welders go over and buy a couple of shares of Columbia Barge Line stock.
He soon learned that the Russells were planning to buy the farmer's tug outright. at a Columbia Barge Line stockholders meeting. Lapalato took his shares and went to the meeting.
And we're all sitting around the meeting and jobbing around. Pretty soon the head of the meeting says, well, Lapalato, if you get your fanny out of here, we'll go ahead with this meeting and with the stockholders meeting. I hauls out this couple of shares of stock. I said, I'm a stockholder. He just heard a pin drop.
Lapalato undercut the Russells. He offered less money to buy out the farmers, but he offered it up front.
They never had no meeting. Everybody dunked out of the room, got their stock, and brought it up there. By noon that day, we owned Columbia Barge Lines.
They would accuse each other of cutting rates. They would accuse each other of doing special things to win my customer. You went and did this to get my customer, and you went and sneaked in there and did this and that kind of a thing. And it was just high competition, I guess you'd call it.
He did have a reputation of being tough.
And so did you.
Yeah, only I was tougher.
Russell saw his chance to prove it when Lapalato lost a barge in the rocks below Celilo Falls.
The insurance company put the barge up for sale. And I thought, well, hell, nobody's going to sell a bid on that barge but us. So I just sat by and...
Lapalato collected the insurance money for his stranded barge, but he thought he could reclaim the barge for free if no one submitted a bid to the insurance company to salvage it. But Lou Russell did. For Russell, the barge, worth $100,000, was a steal.
So he got the barge.
Tried pulling on it and ballasting it and all the tricks I could think of, and I couldn't get it off, so finally my dad made arrangements with the Corps of Engineers to raise the river 3 feet.
Nearly 400 miles upriver at Grand Coulee Dam, the water was released. It took 4 days to reach the stranded barge.
Anyway, as soon as the water hit there, well, the barge came off, and then it got in this big eddy, and I had to run it down to catch it because I had it ballasted down the stern, and it would go about 4 miles an hour right for a rock bluff and then stop about 10 feet from the bluff and turn around and go someplace else. It never touched, but it scared the heck out of me.
They were times like two little kids, really.
What was the feeling between these two companies?
Well, I think we all respected each other's abilities, but very competitive, very competitive. We were always thinking that you want to get to the locks before the other company, or if there was only one place to tie a barge up, you want to be the first guy there to tie it up.
When the Dalles Dam was under construction, the river was squeezed through a narrow channel between the construction site and Big Eddy locks.
I remember Father he had to run all the tugs up through that. And he'd come on there, and the skipper was on that boat, he'd just shake his head. And Father would rack those engines up, and he said, you can't do that, Captain. And he'd just keep racking them up, and the black smoke's pouring out, and the skipper's sitting there just waiting for those engines to blow up.
The water got so crazy and wild that you could not take a loaded barge upstream.
The competition turned wild, too. The Corps of Engineers provided a dock for each company to pump petroleum above the dam site. But when one pump broke, they had to share the one that worked.
So about 10 o'clock at night, I got a call from one of my captains that Slim had come down there and shut the pumps off.
Russell headed for the pumps, taking no chances.
So I put on my crash helmet I used for jumping horses in those days. Just in case I got whopped on the deck, I'd be able to get back up again. And I loaded my brother in our automobile, who was an ex-Marine sergeant trained for killing.
For both men, time was money.
When Slim came back down to shut off the pump, I pointed out to him that he'd better not do that or he's going to get whomped. And he decided that maybe I was right.
Couldn't see any situation to get into fisticuffs just because a couple of brothers were a little bit up in arms.
And you did nothing wrong?
Not in my estimation.
You know, at one time, the two companies weren't close at all. In fact, we had orders that, hey, you can't touch this guy, you can't tie up to his docks. If he's aground, leave him aground. And I mean, this thing really got going after a while, you know. And of course, the personnel on the boats, they're the ones that really took it hard because, hey, we're just the same. We're doing the same job and everything else. And if we see, even though he's a competitor aground, we're going to pull him off, you know. But, boy, if you were caught doing any of that, things were getting rough on you.
In 1948, an early snow melt brought the worst flood in 50 years to the Columbia Basin. Then it rained. Above Grand Coulee Dam, Roosevelt Lake was full and backing water into Canada. By treaty between the United States and Canada, the water had to be released. At Umatilla, the river crested at 28 feet above flood stage. Above Bonneville, the river claimed the tug Robert Gray. In Portland, the community of Vanport was destroyed. 50 people died in the flood. The winter of 1949 was as cold as the previous winter had been warm. The river was frozen solid. Towns above Bonneville were cut off and needed heating oil. Keith Rodenbaugh, captain of the Windquat, was trying to break through.
It took us probably a week to make one trip sometimes. Sometimes we wouldn't even go anything. One day we would maybe move a mile, mile and a half. Just cold and miserable.
When that wind was whistling by that pilot house, it sounded if you had laid on a railroad track and had a train run over the top of you. It couldn't have been more terrifying.
There has never been another freeze like the one of 1949. McNary Dam was finished that year, covering Umatilla Rapids. The dams not only covered the rapids, they lessened the threat of ice and floods.
You know, it's like a ferry boat now. I mean, there's no problems. And back in the old days, now those were problems, and that was fun.
The floodgates closed on the Dalles Dam in 1957, covering Celilo Falls.
When the dam was finally blocked, the Indians came down to watch it fill. They didn't believe it could happen. And then all of a sudden, the water was still. End of everything. End of 10,000 years. The salmon, the falls, their place of worship.
In 1968, the John Day Dam would flood the last section of rapids on the Columbia River. On the Snake, 4 more dams would be built to complete the 465-mile inland waterway between Lewiston, Idaho, and the Pacific Ocean. Never had a river changed so much, so quickly.
You guys must have been glad when all the dams came along to make the ride a lot smoother.
Well, most of the boys that worked for me were kind of disappointed. They said it got too tame. They liked that challenge of swift water and everything.
Lapalato sold inland navigation in the late 50s. The river offered few challenges for him. He started boat businesses in Alaska and the offshore oil fields of California and Louisiana. He is 81 now. He and his wife Frances live in Vancouver, Washington, near the water. He works every day.
What is it about the water?
It's worse than cocaine.
We decided that the two of us decided we were going to live on boats the rest of our lives.
Lou Russell lives on a redesigned oil exploration vessel on Seattle's Lake Union with his wife Sandra. When he retired and sold Tidewater barge lines in the 80s, the company held a virtual monopoly on commercial transportation on the Upper Columbia.
You made millions, didn't you?
Well, I made quite a bit, you know.
Millions?
Yes, quite a few millions.
You made a few millions, didn't you, really?
Could be. I don't know. I've never counted them.
Every farm, every wheat field from there on down to here owes a lot to these men because they haul their products down here. Down here where it goes to where it goes into a ship, where it goes off to the markets of the world.
When both men came to the Upper Columbia, not much grain moved downriver. In 1989, 4 million tons passed through Bonneville locks, and the ports of the Columbia are the leading exporters of agricultural products on the West Coast.
Yeah, those were tough days. We had our time of iron men and wooden ships here on this river, the same as they did on the sea.
I would fire captains of mine today if they would do things I did when I was a youngster as a captain.
This sounds terrible, but I've had such a wonderful life that I don't regret anything that I've done.
Lou Russell has been battling cancer for more than a year. The bitter feelings about his battle with Slim Lapalato are fading.
You know, it's very interesting, but until we started discussing that, I never realized that we were so much alike. We are a whole bunch alike. And that's probably why we were such fierce competitors. It's been very interesting to see what happened if we'd worked together.
The Russell family was a very close-knit family. He was very dedicated to his mother. Always had a lot of respect for Lou and for his father.
I think that secretly I've always admired him, and I have a hunch he's probably admired what I've done. And there is no hatred between Slim Lapalato and myself. It was just a natural, competitive thing of two different people, and out of it came excellence. And that's the American way.